Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a really challenging, truly important case. It's one with just so many layers. Our mission here is to carefully unpack the tragic events around the Colin Jeffrey Haney case. C.J. Haney from Grantsville, Utah. We'll be looking at news reports, legal summaries, perspectives from family, a whole stack of sources.
And it's more than just the sequence of events, isn't it? We're exploring the attempts to understand why, the legal side for a young offender, and actually some surprising details about his development since then.
Right.
It really forces you to confront some uncomfortable things about youth, mental health, the justice system, how they can collide.
So we'll dive into the facts, piece together the timeline, and then zoom out a bit. Look at the context, the red flags some people saw, and the impact. It's a lot to unpack. Okay, let's get started, The fateful day. A chilling timeline. All right, let's start in Grantsville, Utah. Paint a picture for us.
Well, Grantsville, it's about 35 miles west of Salt Lake City, a small city known for being quiet, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. And get this, they hadn't had a homicide there in nearly 2 decades, 20 years.
Wow, 20 years, so really peaceful.
Exactly, which just makes what happened on January 17th, 2020, even more jarring. That peace was just shattered. Horrific events unfolding over hours in one home.
And what's striking, based on the investigation, is how methodical it all seemed.
Yes, methodical is the word, almost deliberate. It wasn't a sudden burst of violence. The timeline shows it happened over the course of an afternoon into the evening.
Which is deeply unsettling in itself.
It really is. It suggests a level of planning, of control that's quite chilling. Not spontaneous rage.
So the investigation found that C.J. Haney, he was 16 at the time, stayed home from school that day.
That's right. He was home alone initially.
And then as family members started coming home individually, that's when it began, around 1 p.m.
Around 1 p.m., yes.
Yeah.
His mother, Consuelo Alejandra Haney, she was 52, came home. She just picked up his 12-year-old sister, Milan Haney, from school.
Oh, gosh.
Together. And it's believed they lost their lives very soon after walking in. Multiple gunshot wounds, head, neck, upper body. Just devastating.
The brutality right from the start.
And no chance to react, it seems. A swift, immediate attack as soon as they entered their home. What should have been safe?
Then, it wasn't over. There was a pause.
Yeah, pause. About an hour later, around 2 p.m., his 17-year-old sister, Alexis Haney, got home from school.
And she met the same fate.
She did. Shot multiple times. 5 times in the head and chest, the report said.
It's just horrific. And then another wait.
Another long wait.
Yeah.
It wasn't until around 5:17 p.m., so over 3 hours later, that his 14-year-old brother, Matthew Haney, came home.
From school as well.
From school. And he was met with a single gunshot wound to his head.
The waiting, the hours between each event, it's hard to comprehend.
It really is. That 5-hour span with these calculated pauses, it's critical to understanding this. It points strongly towards premeditation, control, not a momentary snap like you might initially assume. It really feels like someone lying in wait, strategically, for each person. It's chillingly organized.
And the final act came when the father arrived.
Around 6:15 p.m., yes. His father, Colin Haney, walked in. He was shot immediately, in the leg.
But he fought back.
He did. A struggle started. The father was hit in the head multiple times with some object they never specified what. But somehow, critically, he managed to wrestle the handgun away from CJ.
That must have been the turning point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That act stopped the violence. The father, injured, assaulted again, still disarmed him. An incredible will to survive.
Unbelievable bravery.
It really stands out against the earlier pattern. He saved himself, potentially, and ended the rampage right there. Just immense fortitude to immediate aftermath and initial revelations.
So after that struggle, after the father gets the gun,
Right.
What happens then? The immediate moments after must have been surreal.
Completely surreal. And that's when, according to the investigation, CJ made this shocking confession directly to his father.
Right there, after everything.
Right there. Imagine. You're wounded. You've just disarmed your son after seeing, well, after the unimaginable. And then he tells you.
What'd he say?
He reportedly told his father that, quote, his intention was to kill everyone in the house except himself.
Except himself. Wow.
Chilling, isn't it? A glimpse into his mindset right then. A horrifying plan focused solely on his own survival, seemingly. The full why wasn't clear yet, but the scope of his intent, undeniable.
A complete self-serving objective. Just staggering.
It really is.
And then things took another bizarre turn, didn't they? With the neighbor.
Yeah, this part is almost hard to believe.
Yeah.
Shortly after all this, a neighbor just happened to stop by, completely unaware of what had just unfolded inside.
Just a normal visit.
Apparently so. And the father, Colin, injured as he was, asked the neighbor to drive both him and CJ to the hospital in Toole Mountain West Medical Center.
Together. He took CJ with him after that confession.
Together. It's remarkable composure or perhaps shock driving that decision, seeking help involving someone else, but in this oddly controlled way.
And during the drive.
During the drive, CJ reportedly confessed again, this time to the neighbor.
Just stated it plainly.
Told the neighbor he had killed his family. Just like that.
Oh my God, what did the neighbor do?
Called 911 immediately, understandably. So police met them right at the hospital.
And CJ's demeanor when arrested?
This is another detail that's just unsettling. Police described him as calm.
Calm. After confessing to killing his mother and 3 siblings and attacking his father?
Calm. That's the description. No overt distress, no panic you'd expect. It just adds another layer of complexity, I suppose.
Perplexing doesn't even begin to cover it. That calm demeanor is...
Yeah, profoundly disturbing. 3, the search for why, motive and personal struggles. Okay, so the immediate events are laid out, but the question looming over everything, for the community, investigators, everyone, was just why? Why did this happen?
Exactly. And while a simple motive wasn't just handed out when he pleaded guilty, later on, court documents, statements from prosecution and defense, they started to shed some light.
What did they reveal? Well, connecting the dots from the sources, it points to a really complex internal world for CJ. The pre-sentence report is key here.
What did it say?
CJ himself stated, and this is basically a quote from the report, "I thought if I killed my dad, everyone would turn against me. So I made a selfish decision to kill them all."
Wait, so fear of being ostracized by the family after killing his dad led him to kill them too?
That's the logic presented. It's warped, profoundly so.
Yeah.
But it suggests this fear of judgment was a factor in escalating the plan.
And prosecutors mentioned something else.
They noted he expressed a desire for a clean slate, a new opportunity in life, which points towards this deep desperation, wanting to escape his reality somehow.
Even through such horrific means.
Tragically, yes. A desperate, misguided attempt to erase perceived problems.
But what's so hard to square, as the prosecution pointed out, is his relationship with his siblings.
Right, because despite the anger he apparently felt toward his father, sources indicate he had good, even healthy relationships with Milan, Alexis, and Matthew.
Yet they were included in this plan.
They were. And that just challenges everything we think we understand about motive, doesn't it? How do you reconcile good relationships with that?
It defies logic.
It really does. It points towards something deeper, maybe a profound disassociation, or a complete inability to separate his conflict with his father from everyone else. Maybe his reality was just so distorted.
The sources don't give a clear answer on that specific point.
Not a simple one. It just highlights these incredibly complex psychological factors. The why isn't straightforward anger or resentment towards everyone. It's more tangled.
And the defense offered more context on his state of mind leading up to it.
They did. They painted a picture of him really struggling, suffering from severe anxiety, becoming increasingly isolated socially in the months before.
What was driving the isolation?
It seems it was worsened by growing arguments with his father, feelings of not meeting unfulfilled expectations. This led him to withdraw even more.
So a downward spiral. Less connection, more internal pressure.
Exactly. The defense attorney's letter was quite stark. It said CJ did not have a plan, but felt the only option to address his situation was to shoot his father and the rest of his family.
The only option. That's terrifying.
It underscores how trapped he must have felt, from his perspective then. Crucially, though, the attorney added that CJ now realizes, quote, "There, of course, were many options for help."
Hindsight, but too late.
Tragically. It shows the danger of that trapped mindset, that perceived lack of escape, and the absolute importance of finding help before someone feels that's their only way out. 4, red flags and missed opportunities.
Which brings us to something really crucial and, frankly, heartbreaking, the red flags. CJ's older brother, Danny, spoke about this.
Yes, Danny Haney's input is incredibly significant. He talked to the court about things the family noticed beforehand.
What did he say?
He revealed that about a month before it all happened, the family knew CJ was having dark thoughts. That was the term Danny used.
Dark thoughts. Did they specify what kind?
The sources don't detail the specifics, just that general worrying description. But it was serious enough that his mother, Consuelo, actually asked CJ if he wanted to go to therapy.
So his mother saw it. She tried to address it.
She did. A clear sign of concern, an attempt to get him help. A real potential turning point.
But it didn't happen.
It didn't. According to Danny, his father, Colin, refused to send CJ to therapy.
Refused? Why?
Danny testified that his father's reason was fear. He didn't want CJ to say anything to the therapist that would make him end up in jail.
Oh, wow. Fear of the system. Fear of legal trouble over getting mental health help.
It's a fear some parents might have, that hesitation about involving external systems. But the irony here, as Danny pointed out, it's just devastating.
Because CJ ended up in jail anyway.
Exactly. He ended up with a life sentence, and the rest of the family lost their lives. It's a terrible illustration of how prioritizing that fear over seeking help can have the absolute worst consequences.
It raises huge questions about access, stigma.
Huge questions about the choices families face, the fear surrounding mental health care, and the potential cost of not acting. It's like a systemic issue, too, where the perceived risk of seeking help becomes a barrier itself.
And Danny believes it could have been prevented.
He stated that quite clearly.
Yeah.
His profound belief is that the tragedy could have been prevented if help had been sought then. Even though CJ apparently doesn't blame his father now, Danny still feels that way.
You can only imagine the weight he carries.
He described living every day seeing their faces, being traumatized beyond imagination. It's the enduring burden of the survivor, grappling with those what-ifs.
His perspective is just vital. It grounds the whole discussion in that very real human cost of missed opportunities.
Absolutely. It highlights the family dynamics, the mental health struggles, and that crushing weight of wondering what if. It really underscores the need for safe, accessible mental health support that families trust. V. Legal proceedings and sentences.
Okay, let's turn to the legal side of things. What happened after the arrest?
Well, given the nature of the crimes, multiple victims, the severity, CJ Haney was charged as an adult. That's a key point, despite him being 16.
Charged as an adult in the 3rd District Court. And the charges.
4 counts of aggravated murder, that's for his mother and siblings, and 1 count of attempted aggravated murder for the attack on his father.
Aggravated murder carrying the most serious penalties.
Exactly. It signifies especially heinous circumstances under the law.
Right.
Reflects the extreme nature of what happened.
How did the case proceed? Did it go to trial?
No, it didn't go to a full trial. He actually pleaded guilty. That was on July 19th, 2022.
So he admitted responsibility.
He did, which led to the sentencing phase. On July 12, 2023, the judge, Teresa Welch, handed down the sentence.
And what was the sentence?
4 consecutive terms of 25 years to life, 1 for each life lost.
Consecutive meaning, one after the other.
Yes. So they stack up. It totals a minimum of 100 years he has to serve before even being considered for parole.
100 years minimum, essentially a life sentence.
Effectively, yes. The attempted murder charge for his father was ordered to run concurrently, meaning at the same time. So it didn't add more years to that 100-year minimum.
And the prosecution's stance on this sentence?
They pushed for the harshest possible outcome. Scott Broadhead, the prosecutor, really emphasized the methodical way the shootings happened, the number of victims. These were children he knew and supposedly cared about.
He felt the severity demanded it.
He basically said, if this case doesn't warrant the toughest sentence Utah law allows, what case possibly could?
It highlights that tension, doesn't it? Justice for the victims versus the offender's age.
Absolutely. The death penalty was off the table because he was under 18. That's Utah law, even for adult charges. But these consecutive life terms, they clearly reflect the extreme gravity the court saw.
Did the judge comment specifically?
Yes. Judge Welch noted the aggravated circumstances. She pointed to the severity, the number of victims, and specifically that methodic nature we discussed earlier. She stressed it wasn't a crime of passion, but of calculation.
So the court clearly saw the premeditation as a major factor.
Undeniably. That deliberation heavily influenced the severity of the sentence. 6. A complex narrative. Rehabilitation and remorse.
Now, here's where the narrative takes another turn, one that's maybe surprising, given everything we've discussed. The defense argued he wasn't a lost cause.
Right. This is a really complex aspect.
Yeah.
His attorney, Richard Van Wagener, and even some letters from neighbors, presented a very different picture of CJ after the crimes.
How so?
They focused heavily on his time in detention. For the 3.5 years after his arrest, he was at the Salt Lake Valley Youth Center.
A juvenile facility.
Yes. And his attorney argued strongly that CJ responded to and embraced the structure there, the therapy, the programs, embraced it all in a really positive way.
So he engaged with the rehabilitation efforts?
Profoundly, according to the defense. They highlighted significant progress. He earned his high school diploma while locked up.
Okay.
He started taking college courses. And crucially, he had zero disciplinary issues the entire time he was there.
No trouble at all.
None reported. His lawyer described him as a prime example of the kind of neurological development possible during those formative teenage years.
Neurological development, what does that mean in practical terms here?
Well, it refers to how the adolescent brain is still developing, particularly the parts for reasoning, impulse control, empathy. The idea is that, unlike a fully formed adult brain, a teen brain has more capacity to change, to develop insight, self-reflection, social skills, even after something horrific.
So the potential for genuine change is greater.
That's the argument, that the structure in therapy allowed for significant growth in his understanding, his empathy, taking responsibility. His brain was still malleable, essentially.
Which leads to that really difficult question. How do you reconcile the person who did this at 16 with the person described at 20?
It's incredibly difficult. He spoke in court, addressed the victims, the community.
What did he say?
He said, "I want you to know I've learned from what I've done." He apologized for the pain and suffering and this detail. He thanked the detention center staff, said, "You've given me something I've always wanted, which is friends."
Friends. Given the isolation mentioned earlier, that's quite poignant.
It really is. It speaks volumes about his previous state. And this connects to what some neighbors wrote in support letters.
What did they say about him before?
They described him as socially awkward, a kid who was bullied, teased. They saw him descending into a darker and darker place because of conflicts at school and home.
So they saw the struggle beforehand.
They did. One neighbor even wrote, and this is hard to process, although hard to believe considering the circumstances, "Jeffrey is a good kid."
Wow, that's a complex statement.
It paints this incredibly complicated picture, doesn't it? It doesn't excuse anything, not at all, but it challenges a simple view of him as just a monster.
It forces you to consider that capacity for change, the impact of environment, therapy, even within prison walls.
Exactly. And it leaves you wondering, what if that kind of support, that structure, had been there before? It's an unanswerable question, but it hangs there. 7, enduring impact and unanswered questions.
So bringing it all together, what's the lasting impact on Grantsville, on the family?
Well, Grantsville was deeply shaken naturally. That sense of safety, built over 2 decades, gone overnight. The yellow ribbons, the signs of mourning. The whole community felt it.
A collective trauma.
Definitely. And for the family. The father, Colin Haney, chose not to speak at the sentencing.
His silence speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Immense volumes about the ongoing physical, emotional trauma. Words just aren't adequate. And the older brother, Danny.
Who was away at college.
Yes. He continues to grapple with the loss, with those questions about prevention, the red flags he saw. His pain is palpable in his statements.
It truly sounds like, as the prosecutor said, there were no winners.
Not a single one. C.J. Haney is facing what's almost certainly life behind bars. He's 20 now. Whether he stays in the youth facility or moves to an adult prison is up to the Board of Pardons, but the sentence itself is set.
A devastating outcome all around.
Utterly devastating. And it serves as this stark, painful reminder, doesn't it, about taking adolescent mental health seriously.
Recognizing the signs.
Recognizing them, yes, but also acting on them. The challenges are immense: fear, stigma, lack of resources. But the cost of not intervening, we see it laid bare here.
It really forces a broader question for society, doesn't it?
It does. How do we get better at identifying and supporting young people who are struggling so profoundly? How do we offer real alternatives before they reach such a desperate, tragic point?
That's the lingering question, isn't it? What stands out most to you after digging into all this? Outro, this deep dive.
It's been incredibly heavy. The C.J. Haney case just forces you to confront so many difficult, uncomfortable truths. It's such a stark picture of what can happen when mental health struggles and violence collide, especially with young people. And there's that tension, isn't there, between the absolute need for accountability for these terrible crimes and what we're learning about adolescent brain development, the potential for change, for rehabilitation, even after acts that seem unforgivable. This case really puts that conflict front and center.
It really does.
Which leads to that bigger question beyond the courts. What our collective responsibility as families, as a society, when we see those red flags? How do we build systems that actually help kids struggling with isolation, anxiety, distorted thinking? Systems they and their families can trust before tragedy strikes.
Offer real paths forward.
Exactly. This case, as extreme as it is, really pushes us to think about youth, mental health, family support, and how our justice system handles these deeply complex situations. There's so much to reflect on.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it offered some insight and maybe sparked some necessary reflection on these incredibly difficult issues.